This is the Behind the Line podcast, coming to you from the crazy, chaotic lines of the Pacific Northwest. And this is Pacific Northwest Headline News. Well, on September 27th, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell released his proposed $7.4 billion 2023-24 budget. It reflects promises Harrell has made around policing and public safety, affordable housing, encampment clearing, basic city services, supporting small businesses, and more. The budget is now in the City Council's hands. Last week, council members held 4 days of budget hearings to work through the mayor's proposal and begin hashing out their priorities. The problem being that the city is facing a $141 million budget deficit, and that is expected to grow in the coming years. How exactly do you run a business, which that is what the city is, with a $141 million budget deficit? No private business could operate that way, but government sure loves to. The city is required by law to have a balanced budget. With a projected $141 million revenue shortfall next year, two choices are on the table: cut costs or find a new source of money to close the gap. Harrell has proposed a hybrid plan. In his proposed budget, many departments, though not all, see reductions to stave off deeper cuts. Harrell wants to fill some of the hole in the general fund with about $95 million in tax revenue earmarked for affordable housing, homelessness, climate resilience, and small business support in 2023, and $93 million of it in 2024. Seattle created the Jumpstart payroll expense tax on large businesses in 2020 after first being tied up in court, then redirected to help with pandemic emergency costs. The tax is operating as designed and proving lucrative. It raised $231 million in 2021, $31 million more than estimated. As part of his plan to use Jumpstart revenues, Harrell also sent the council a proposal to revise rules governing how those funds can be spent, which would open the door to always using Jumpstart to backfill deficits in lean budget years. Part of his plan also involves sending parking enforcement officers back under the control of SPD. In response to 2020 calls for police reform and racial justice, the Seattle City Council voted to move the parking enforcement decision from the police department to the Department of Transportation, which was a really dumb idea because administrative oversight led to parking enforcement officers working without authority under SDOT for 7 months, which meant the city had to refund $5 million in parking tickets and dismiss another $5 million in unpaid tickets written during that time. A survey of parking enforcement officers, the majority said they wanted to move back to the SPD, and Harrell has proposed doing just that, putting $20 million in the police department budget to pay for it. He argues it will be more efficient since most parking enforcement operations are still physically run out of the police department, and the move will result in $5 million in administrative cost savings. No kidding, parking enforcement belongs at the police department. Councilmember Lisa Herbold, however, who chairs the Public Safety Committee, voices concern about it moving parking enforcement back to SPD, but doesn't want to keep it in SDOT either. She instead wants to see it move to the newly formed Community Safety Communications Center, which handles 911 calls in Seattle, and is another attempt by the City Council to remove civilian roles from the SPD. Harrell has also proposed spending $38 million on the Unified Care Team in 2023, including adding 6 full-time homeless outreach staff. The proposal would create 4 to 6 units within the team, each assigned to a specific region in the city. The mayor's staff argues this approach will help them better serve residents of those communities and build better relationships with the homeless people they're trying to connect to services. Several council members raised concern about expanding the city's capacity to remove encampments, while the city still suffers from a severely insufficient amount of shelter space and affordable housing to refer people to. He's also proposing cutting pay for social service workers. In 2019, the City Council voted unanimously to tie Human Services Department contract increases to the Consumer Price Index, in part to ensure wages at least increase to match inflation. In Harrell's proposed budget, it would cap those contract increases at 4%. Provider contracts were supposed to increase by 7.6% in 2023. However, This means Harrell's proposal amounts to a pay cut. The proposal drew the ire of many social service providers who testified in opposition at last week's budget hearings. We've been very, very clear on the council about our intent to invest in the provider workforce, said Lisa Herbold at the hearings. Yet the budget as proposed fails to follow the law and only provides a 4% inflationary increase, far from the 7.6% required. This leaves the council saddled with a huge gap, and the difference is taken out of the pockets of frontline workers who are least able to afford it. As per usual, council members are now working on their proposed amendments to the mayor's budget. They will then work to balance any adopted amendments with the mayor's proposal before finalizing and adopting the budget in late November. These out-of-control government budgets and spending plans cannot go on, and we're seeing this play out across the country, federally and at the local level. At some point, this is all going to come crashing down. Seattle City Council member, socialist Kashama Sawant, also anti-police, one of the biggest anti-police supporters in the city, criticized the city police department Wednesday for its response to repeated disturbing incidents at her home. According to Sawant, bags of human excrement have been thrown on the lawn of her private residence 6 times, including as recently as last week, and the Seattle Police Department has failed to properly investigate. The material used in these repeated attacks is classified as biohazardous waste. The police inform me the material can't be sent to their lab for further investigation due to its hazardous nature. That seems quite odd, considering that hospital labs do tests on human fecal matter all the time, but it does speak to the danger of having it repeatedly thrown in one's yard. Sawant wrote in a letter to police and city leadership on Wednesday, noting she had to call poison control on one instance after her dogs got into the bag of waste. Most concerning is the very high likelihood that this extreme and hostile behavior is politically motivated and could turn into more serious and dangerous harassment, she added, noting past threats made against her. According to Sawant, the police have failed to seriously investigate the incidents reported by her and her husband, including ignoring 2 witnesses, refusing to test fecal matter, not taking video evidence collected by a neighbor, and not investigating a recent email sent to Sawant in which the sender calls her the queen of shit and tells her to sit on her shit throne of human excrement. The police department would not release any reports related to the incident on Wednesday, citing the investigation is ongoing, but said it's doing its due diligence to investigate Sawant's claims. Well, Sawant, why don't you try walking around the city sidewalks of your city and see how much human shit you have to walk around, as you call it, biohazard. You don't seem to have any concern about that being in kids' parks or on playgrounds or the sidewalks or anywhere else the rest of us go. You're getting the same kind of response from the police that the rest of us get when we call. Very little. But because you're on the city council or you're special, you should get some sort of special treatment. Sawant's trying to call this a hate crime. SPD Detective Patrick Mickton said Wednesday that the report doesn't meet state or city standards for a hate crime, but the department would continue and investigate. Last month, the council unanimously passed a resolution condemning harassment, threats, and political violence against elected officials, election workers, those seeking elected office, and other public servants, in step with the Metropolitan King County Council passing similar legislation. Yes, they'll pass laws to protect themselves, to make themselves special, but the rest of us, we're screwed. They'll keep releasing these people with 40-plus arrests and assaults and violent crimes back on the street to throw, nurses coming home from the hospital down multiple flights of stairs at the light rail station, or for deranged homeless people to stab people at bus stops. Yeah, that's all okay. But boy, if somebody harasses a city council member, or they determine it's harassment, or for God's sake, somebody throws a bag of poop on your yard. How many people who live in the city have shit in their yard all the time from homeless people or whatever? Is anybody doing anything about that? No. Nope. But council members, city officials, they get special treatment, or they feel like they should anyway. They shouldn't have to deal with this mess they've created for the rest of us. It's ridiculous. And further evidence of our great economy, Microsoft will lay off about 1,000 employees, the company confirmed Tuesday, although it is not confirmed if the layoffs are isolated in gaming divisions. Employees who work for Xbox and other Microsoft-owned studios said they were being laid off, the Washington Post reported. Microsoft declined to disclose if any employees based in the Seattle area have been affected by the layoffs, although one Microsoft employee who tweeted about being laid off said they worked at the Redmond campus. In a statement, the company's spokesperson said Microsoft makes structural adjustments as needed. Well, Microsoft has a large gaming division centered in the Redmond area, so there could be a lot of layoffs there. Microsoft missed the mark on its fourth quarter earnings report and reduced its revenue forecast. The company cited macroeconomic challenges such as a strengthening dollar, the ongoing war in Ukraine. Okay, how does that affect people playing video games? And manufacturing shutdowns in China that hamstrung PC production as a source of its underperformance. Well, maybe we should build that stuff in America, huh? Well, it seems Governor Gavin Newsom of California is at odds with his Democrat cohorts, who are trying to use the old time-tested method of tax the rich to get what we want routine. A California ballot measure that would tax the rich to help put more electric cars on the road may seem tailor-made to win support from Democrats in the state known for climate leadership, but Proposition 30 has one notable opponent, Governor Gavin Newsom. That's put the Democratic governor on the opposite side of his own party and against his traditional environmental allies. The proposition before voters would add a 1.75% tax on personal income of more than $2 million or fewer than 43,000 people. State analysts estimate it would raise up to $5 billion a year, mostly to help people buy electric vehicles and build charging stations, with some also dedicated to resources for fighting wildfires. Why should those 43,000 people have to pay for the rest of the people in California to have electric cars and charging stations? Why? What is the reason for that? Environmental and health group backers say California needs dedicated funding to speed the transition away from gas-powered cars and help lower planet-warming emissions. Transportation accounts for 40% of California's greenhouse gas emissions, and increasingly deadly wildfires are another major source of carbon. We can't meet our climate goals without something like this, said Mary Kreisman, Chief Executive Officer for California Environmental Voters. It's either going to be all of us who pays, or it's going to be the wealthiest who can afford to pay. Well, reading those words aloud, it's ridiculous that you just expect that because somebody's made more money than you, they should have to pay for something for someone that can't afford it. If the government wants this so bad, then the government can figure out a way to pay for it. Maybe stop spending hundreds of millions of dollars on homeless people and illegal aliens and all the services you provide for them and put it to this. Newsom has branded Proposition 30 as a money grab by ride-sharing giant Lyft, which has spent at least $45 million backing it. State regulators have mandated that all rideshare trips be zero emission by 2030. Uber has not taken a position on the measure. Don't be fooled, Prop 30 is being advertised as a climate initiative, but in reality it was devised by a single corporation to funnel state income taxes to benefit their company, Newsom said in one TV ad. Supporters reject that characterization, saying that Lyft got involved after environmental groups were already discussing a ballot measure. Cressman said that it was important to call on our own team and governor out for lying about the origins of the measure. Half the money raised in Proposition 30 for electric vehicles would go into an equity account designed to expand transportation options and limit air pollution in low-income or disadvantaged neighborhoods. It could be used to help people buy electric cars or to put cleaner delivery trucks, buses, and even e-bikes on the roads. Wildfires, too, have become an increasingly urgent problem as climate change makes the state hotter and drier, and poor forest management, which nobody ever talks about. Most of the state's deadliest and most destructive wildfires have occurred in the last few years, and the state estimates wildfires released more than 85 million metric tons of carbon emissions in 2021, more than the annual emissions from electricity. The money raised by the tax wouldn't count toward a state budget rule that says a certain percentage of revenue must go to K through 12 education, a provision the teachers don't like. Meanwhile, the nonpartisan Legislative Analyst's Office said the proposal could force lower spending in other areas based on certain budget rules, something supporters of the measure dispute. You know, rules are just rules until they decide they don't want to follow the rules, right? Business groups note that California's personal income tax is already the highest in the nation, and the ballot measure would put it over 15% for the highest earners. You're going to see a major exodus from the state, unlike what we've already seen. California is just digging its own grave with this guy in charge. California has finally decided to end its COVID-19 emergency, maybe, after another 4 months. We'll see, because science. Governor Gavin Newsom announced that the state will end the emergency order on February 28, 2023. Apparently, that is the date that the almighty science that Democrats speak so religiously of has determined will be safe. Newsom said that the cushion of more than 4 months will provide the healthcare system needed flexibility to handle any potential surge that might occur after the holidays in January and February. In other words, don't count your COVID emergency orders until they expire. California's coronavirus response has been erratic since the beginning. While Newsom cloaked his orders in the language of science, the state kept schools closed longer than any other in defiance of the data showing that children needed to be in school. Localities banned outdoor dining and shut down playgrounds. All of this was made possible or encouraged by the state's emergency order, which Newsom boasted about through the pandemic, and even on Monday as he announced the emergency order would be phased out. In the same token, California courts dealt a blow this month against Gavin Newsom's COVID-19 mandates, which forced businesses to close and cleaned out churches for more than a year. It's been 2 years since Newsom locked down America's leading economic powerhouse with a strict disaster declaration that slowed commerce and prompted a pandemic exodus. A trio of rulings show that businesses are starting to see justice in the courts for alleged misery they say was unjustly imposed. It will be a chilling effect for the tyrants of the future, civil rights attorney Mark Mauser told Washington Examiner. These court rulings are needed to rein in the abuse of emergency powers by tyrant Newsom. 2 cases involved businesses that protested shutdowns, and a third was brought by a church that was also part of a sweeping closure order during 2020 that shuttered 40,000 businesses, more than any other state. 1/3 of California's restaurants are permanently closed, according to media reports. The entire pandemic response was very hypocritical, said Muser, who has brought 22 lawsuits against Newsom, including 4 that he won in the U.S. Supreme Court. The local flower shop was not allowed to operate, but you can buy flowers at a grocery store. Local electronic stores could not operate, but big box stores like Walmart are open. In the cases, one stands out as groundbreaking issue that could set limits on government control. Images Luxury Nails in Orange County sued for damages, citing the state's emergency declaration law, which says the government must pay reasonable value for properties that are commandeered in an emergency. Newsom declared that spas, gyms, and salons were breeding grounds for COVID-19, and those businesses suffered the lengthiest shutdowns. Gavin Newsom picked and chose who was allowed to open and who was closed, Muser said. When he ordered certain businesses to shut down, he was commandeering those businesses for the betterment of everybody. A Superior Court judge refused the state's request to dismiss the case, and it will proceed to trial. A second business, Tin Horn Flat Salon and Grill, was sued by the city of Burbank for being a public nuisance and ignoring a $50,000 fine incurred by staying open. The restaurant, which has since permanently closed, fought back with a lawsuit of its own. The owners claimed they were targeted after criticizing the city in the media, violating their First Amendment rights. The city of Burbank shut off the restaurant's power and put a fence around the property, which the owners refused to close, while other restaurants stayed open, court papers said. A Los Angeles Superior Court judge refused the state's request to dismiss the counter lawsuit. Finally, Calvary Chapel, San Jose, will not have to pay $200,000 in fines racked up by defying shutdown orders, a state appellate court ruled. Newsom lost 5 Supreme Court cases in which rulings were handed down by saying the shutdowns violated religious freedom, among other federally protected rights. 5 different times the U.S. Supreme Court shut him down over what he was doing to churches, and after the 5th one, he basically raised the white flag, Muser said. I think he will find a new target. 2 conservative counties of eastern Oregon will vote on a ballot measure this November to decide on whether to leave one of the most liberal states in the country and join their western neighbors in a newly redrawn Greater Idaho. The Greater Idaho movement seeks to make 15 of Oregon's counties and parts of 2 others, comprising roughly 2/3 of the Beaver State's land area, part of Idaho. Supporters of the movement say the largely conservative and sparsely populated eastern counties have much more in common with Republican-led Idaho than Oregon, whose politics are dominated by the state's densely populated cities in the west. It makes more sense for eastern Oregonians to get state-level governance coming from Idaho, where they share their values, share their culture, share their politics, than it does to be governed by western Oregon, Greater Idaho spokesman Matt McCaw told Fox News. To date, 9 of Oregon's 36 counties have voted in favor of exploring changes to the state border, and 2 others, Morrow and Wheeler, will vote to endorse the idea on Election Day. If all 17 counties approve the measure, they still face numerous hurdles to actually secede from Oregon and join Idaho. Both states' legislatures and the U.S. Congress would have to approve the move. While states have had their borders redrawn in the past, including Massachusetts after Maine seceded in 1820, there is no precedent for huge swaths of state to pack up and join another existing state. There are various logistical obstacles in redrawing state lines, such as different minimum wages and laws like Oregon's legalization of marijuana. Idaho lawmakers have been more open to the proposal. Earlier this year, Idaho Representative Barbara Edhart introduced legislation stating that lawmakers would continue discussions regarding the border with Oregon. The resolution notes that Oregon has resources that would be highly beneficial to Idaho, such as timber, minerals, and water. Well, it's the same story in eastern Washington. You've got conservatives on both east sides of Washington and Oregon who can't get any headway or anything they want to see done in either one of these states because the Democrats control everything with the densely populated liberal cities of the West Coast. Where is our fair representation? It's non-existent. Well, Democrats in Oregon are scrambling now because it looks as though the governor's race could actually go Republican, mostly because of the skyrocketing crime in the state and in the high-density population areas like Portland. And as concerns mount over Portland's homelessness issue spiraling out of control, members of the city's police department uncovered a cache of loaded guns from a convicted felon's tent who was living on the streets with an open warrant. While speaking with a male in a tent, a gun was seen next to the male in plain view, a caption on the video posted Tuesday to Instagram by the Portland Police Bureau and the PPB's Central Bike Squad states. Police responded to a report of a disturbance in Old Town when they made the discovery. After spotting the first gun, police searched the tent and discovered 2 other loaded guns underneath the man's belongings in the tent. The 63-year-old man's identity has not been revealed. Police did say he's a convicted felon who had an active warrant for parole violation in connection to second-degree assault charge. He was arrested and charged with 3 counts of unlawful possession of a firearm, failure to register as a sex offender stemming from a first-degree rape charge, a felony warrant parole violation, and for being a felon in possession of a firearm. And how much do you want to bet that guy is back on the street in no time? Portland has a homeless population of more than 5,200, according to Fox research on the matter. In one incident late last month, a Portland woman addressed Mayor Ted Wheeler and the Portland City Council, asking they take the issue of homelessness seriously. You have to stop enabling this, Gillian Rose told city leaders. I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm fed up. And I'm so sick of having politicians pander to a woke agenda that's been nothing short of an epic failure. Well stated, ma'am. You've made your point emphatically clear, Wheeler responded, brushing off the remarks with an apparent chuckle. Well, Rose is not alone in her concerns. Portlanders have reported moving from the city as homeless encampments are established outside their front doors and backyards. Additionally, businesses in the city, such as Cracker Barrel, have shut down or moved due to safety concerns. Crime in Portland has skyrocketed in the last few years, with a recent study finding violent crime in the city drastically rose over the last 3 years, most precipitously in 2020 when the city saw near nightly protests and riots over the death of George Floyd. Researchers for the California Partnership for Safe Communities compiled crime data from the city, specifically examining homicides and non-fatal shootings from 2019 to 21. The data found that there was a 144% increase in homicides from January 2019 to June 2021, while non-fatal shootings increased by 241% from January 2019 to December 2021. The violent crimes began ticking up in 2019 with 36 homicides that year compared to 26 in 2018. The city had held a 20-year average of 28 homicides per year, with 2004 as the outlier at 29 homicides. That average was soon obliterated when data showed 2020 notched a 58% increase in homicides compared to the year prior at 57 deaths, and 2021 recorded a 54% increase at 88 homicides. The number of homicides in 2021 was a 238% increase from numbers recorded in 2018. It's the same deal in all these West Coast cities where homeless people are just allowed to rampage through the city and do as they please. Tents in Seattle have been opened up with automatic weapons, assault rifles, guns, drugs, cash, prostitutes. Same thing in Portland. Same thing in these big cities in the California. When are these city leaders going to actually do something about this instead of just letting it go and spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the process with nothing changing? You know, that money's going somewhere, and it's not going to homeless people or getting them off the streets. And with the elections coming up, of course, all these Democrats are going to start pandering to the public now who's complaining about it and say what you want to hear. For instance, the Portland mayor is now saying police's hands-off riot response was not the right strategy during the George Floyd incident. The Portland mayor was very outspoken about not letting police interfere with those rioters who destroyed Portland downtown, who attacked the federal building, who tried to burn police buildings down with police officers inside, with federal officers inside, and nothing was done. But now he's saying that wasn't the right response, it wasn't the right strategy. Please vote for me. Please vote for Democrats. We'll fix this. We'll do the right thing now. We've had all this time to do something, but now we'll do it. Now we'll do it. Come on, people. Vote these people out and get some sensible people in there who will actually make some change. These cities are not safe. It's not safe to walk around. It's not safe to have a business. It's not safe to leave your car parked. I don't know what more you need to see in order to convince you to make the changes necessary. We're like third world countries in some of these cities. Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler is expected this week to roll out a plan that would concentrate some of the city's homeless people, many of whom presently live in tents that line sidewalks, into government-sponsored campsites throughout the city. Wheeler's plan would ban camping on Portland streets but allow homeless people to camp at one of 3 sanctioned sites, which would each be built to accommodate hundreds of people and their tents, according to local news. Now, to me, this is the most sensible thing to do right now. I wish they would do this in Seattle. Get the people off the streets and at least know where they're at. These cities have plenty of vacant properties they could use. They need to put them someplace other than in the streets where they can be monitored and have services offered to them. The thing I think, and this doesn't go into detail about, what this would cost taxpayers. The thing I personally think is that if you have something like this set up, you're not going to be able to have the typical rules the city tries to put on these people, like no drug use. You've got to be in the encampment at certain hours. I mean, just get them into the encampment and then work on the drug problem and the mental health problem at that point. Portland's homeless crisis has become so ubiquitous to the city is currently fighting a lawsuit from disabled residents who say they can no longer navigate sidewalks because of all the tents. Lawyers involved in the lawsuit uncovered the county's role in distributing 6,550 tents and 27,000 tarps to homeless people in 2021. A similar effort to redirect homeless campers from the streets to sanctioned homeless campsites has proven complicated to execute in San Francisco, which has suffered from its own homeless problems. Each tent reportedly costs the city nearly $60,000 a year to maintain. In objecting to the Portland plan, one county official noted that a price that high, the city should look for actual housing solutions. There's absolutely no reason that a city should spend $60,000 per tent to maintain a site like that. No reason other than government waste and bureaucracy and red tape and everything else that goes along with these government programs. They're impossible to run. There's always incredible amounts of waste and just red tape and bureaucracy. It's just the same story with everything the government tries to do. They're incapable. Thank you for listening to the Behind the Line podcast. For more, visit behindthelinepodcast.com. You can also find us on netnewsnetwork.net, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Telegram, Gab, Parler, and Truth Social. Please like, share, and subscribe.